thing is, there's always more than one way to do something. There's the obvious way, and then there's a more subtle but more intelligent way. So, for example, if I give you an arrow, and I say, I want this arrow in a target 100 meters away, then you can jump up, sprint 100 meters with the arrow, and put it in the target. Great. But then everyone else would laugh at you, because there's a more efficient way to do it. You use a technique, and that technique is the bow. But the bow is very subtle, because if you put the arrow on the bow, the arrow is resting. But it's useless. All you could do is shoot yourself in the foot. What you have to do is you have to pull the arrow in the opposite direction to that in which you want it to go. You take it to a state of dynamic silence, where it's at its full potential. And then you just let go, and the arrow hits the target. And that's what these students are doing. Their awareness is settling down within to the source of their total creative potential, deep within. And then when they come out into activity, after 15 minutes, then they bring that increased creativity and intelligence out into everything that they do. So I've been director of Maharishi School now for almost 20 years, and I see this every single day. Our students come from a wide range of backgrounds. We have no entrance exams, and yet every year they score in the top 1% of all classes in the United States. They win the science fair virtually every year. They win the history fair. They win the speech and drama competitions. They won the American high school math exam 4 years in a row. Here's another example. There are international problem-solving competitions called Destination Imagination and Odyssey of the Mind. And these are competitions that are competed in by schools all over the world. And our school now has won the World Championships 4 times, which is more than any other school in the world. And people often ask me, where do you find such creative students? And the only thing I can say is I don't. I don't go out and find creative students. We take any student, but we teach them this simple technique of transcendental meditation that allows them to experience the source of their own creativity and intelligence deep within. So it's obvious that something fundamental is happening. Something fundamental that is affecting every area of life. And it's rather like if you look at a tree. A tree may have some fruits, some leaves, some branches, some bark. If you want to improve the whole tree, it's actually quite easy. All you have to do is water the root. You enliven the root, and then from within, on the level of the sap, the whole tree gets nourished. One simple thing can nourish the whole tree. So let's ask ourselves the question, what is that most fundamental level of life that needs to be nourished? And as a physicist, I'm tempted to ask a deeper question, actually. What is the most fundamental level of the whole universe? Let's ask that question, because you may not have asked that question today to yourself. You may have been on the tram thinking, something else. But let's think now, what is the most fundamental level of the universe? And to answer that question, we have to turn to physics. And what does physics tell us about the universe in which we live? Well, if you look around the room, you can see some obvious things about the universe. That the universe is infinitely diverse. Everyone in this room looks different. And you look different from the projector, which is very fortunate for you, and the table, and the trees, and the stars, and the galaxies. Infinite diversity and constant change. This room looks different now than it did an hour ago, or a year ago, or 10,000 years ago. But what physicists discovered was that deep within the change are elements of non-change. For example, if I drop this pointer, the law of gravity is the same now as it was an hour ago, a year ago, 10,000 years ago. So physicists discovered these non-changing laws of nature deeply embedded within the structure of the universe. They also discovered that the universe is structured in layers of existence. So if we look at a chart for physics, you see these layers here, that beneath the surface level of the room is a layer of molecules. Now imagine you were like Alice in Wonderland, and you swallowed a little magic potion and shrank yourself down to the size of a molecule. What would this room look like if you were the size of a molecule? It would look completely different. You'd be bombarded by molecules, which would be very annoying, but it would look as if the room was made up mostly of nitrogen and carbon and oxygen. And if you shrank yourself down even smaller to the size of an atom, the room would look as proportionately void as intergalactic space. You'd have an electron over there, a nucleus over there, and just empty space in between. And if you shrank yourself down inside the nucleus, you'd just see protons and neutrons. And if you shrank yourself down inside the protons, you'd just see quarks. Each level of nature has its own reality, its own laws of nature. And what physicists have discovered over the last 40 years is that these fundamental forces of nature, like gravity and electromagnetism and the weak and strong nuclear forces, and the four fundamental types of particle, the up and down quarks, the neutrinos and charged leptons, that these become progressively more unified as you go to finer time and distance scales in nature, culminating today in the discovery of completely unified field theories. So the most up-to-date understanding of the universe in which we live is that deep within the change is a field of non-change. The unified field is eternal. It's non-changing. And it's a field of unity. The way the universe works is there's one single unified field. It interacts with itself. It vibrates within itself. And those vibrations appear as electrons, protons, atoms, molecules, DNA, human beings, projectors, stars, galaxies. Everything in the universe is simply an expression of the vibration of the unified field within itself. Now, why am I telling you this? Because if you go back to that child in kindergarten who wants to know everything, and that child grows up to survive high school like I did, very proud of the fact that I'm a high school survivor, and goes to university, what would happen if you went to the University of Zagreb and you said, here I am, I'm 18, I want to know everything? Well, the registrar would, probably refer you to a psychiatrist, but what they'd say is you can't know everything, you have to do something. So if you chose physics, you'd end up, after your PhD, maybe becoming an expert in laser technology or maybe electronics. But I could draw a chart over here for chemistry, showing how all of chemistry comes out of the unified field, or all of biology, or all of economics, or all of computer science. So you could spend an infinite number of lifetimes studying each of these boxes, and you still wouldn't know everything. But you can see at a glance from this chart that there's one thing that if you could know that, you'd know the one thing by which everything else is known. What would be that one thing that would be most useful to know? It would be this. It's like the seed of the tree. The tree may be infinitely complicated, but you can hold the seed in the palm of your hand, and the total knowledge of the tree is contained within the seed. So the goal of every student should be to know the unified field. Well, it's not so easy through physics. I mean, if you became inspired by this lecture tonight, which I think is highly unlikely, but if you did become inspired, and you decided, I'm going to study physics, so you go to university, it would take you 20 years of hard studying to be able to write down the equations of the unified field and really understand them. And then you'd be able to go to, anyone and say, here are the equations of the unified field. And they might say to you, yes, that's great, but what use are they? And you think, well, what use are they? I mean, will these equations make you wealthy? No. You won't have earned any money for 20 years. Would they make you healthy? No. Would they make you happy? No. Would they make your spouse happy? Almost certainly not if you've been studying physics for 20 years. So the point is, they have absolutely no value. But here's the $1 million question, or I should say the 7 million kuna question. Here's the $1 million question. If we can arrive at the unified field by going to finer levels of material existence through physics, finer levels of objective existence, could we experience the unified field by going to finer levels of subjective existence? Because by definition, the unified field is the source of everything in the universe. It's not just the source of our DNA and our arms and our legs, but it must also be the source of our consciousness, our mind, our intellect, our feelings, emotions, our ego. Everything in the universe is an expression of the unified field. So let's look at consciousness and see if we can arrive at the unified field through objective knowledge. Could we arrive at the unified field through subjective knowledge? And here's our consciousness, and these wavy lines here represent the surface level of the thinking mind in the waking state of consciousness. Now everyone here, just checking, yeah, brilliant. Everyone here is still in the waking state of consciousness, which after electron physics is quite rare. So you're all in the waking state, and therefore you're all thinking, why did I come tonight? When is it going to finish? All these thoughts are going through your mind. This is the surface thinking level of the mind. Now, in transcendental meditation, you experience a thought at finer levels in the development of a thought, transcend the subtlest impulse of thought, and experience that field of pure, silent, unbounded awareness at the source of thought. Now that's very abstract, so I'll make it more concrete with an analogy. Think of the mind as being like an ocean. Now when you're a little kid and you first see the ocean, you get really excited. You say, oh, look at the waves. It's really fascinating. But then you know that the waves can settle down. And when the waves settle down and the waves settle down, and then the subtlest impulse of the wave is transcended, you're left with one silent, unbounded ocean. But that silent state of the ocean is the source of every possible wave. Just like that in the mind, you're having thought after thought after thought. But in transcendental meditation, the mind settles down, and when the subtlest impulse of the thought is transcended, you experience that field of pure, silent, unbounded awareness at the source of thought. But that silent state of awareness is the source of every possible thought. Now, what would be the value of giving a student the experience of the source of their own thinking? Now, go back to that student who wants to know everything. So that student, I had this experience, and I guarantee you at some point in your life you've had this experience. I had this experience in second year university. I'm sitting there studying physics, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm learning more about physics, but I really wish I was fully educated. I wish I knew more about art and philosophy and literature and cosmology. And you know what I'm going to do? Or what I'd like to do? Is I'd like to go down to the library and read every single book in the library and become a fully educated human being. So you go down to the library, you open the door, there's 10 million books, and you just feel depressed. But wait a moment. If that library contains the totality of knowledge in those books, then where does a book come